Welcome to Watercolours with Caroline. This week we're going to be painting a dragonfly. I've used several images from a Facebook group which is free photo images for artists, and usually I just message the photographer and request their permission for my class and the video, and they're usually very pleased to give their permission, so thank you to those photographers. And today we're going to use some cling film for the background. Now you might have this variety, you may have this variety. It doesn't matter what brand it is or quality. It just needs to be the original cling film, and we're just going to use that to make the background for the dragonfly. So get your paints, your cling film, a piece of square paper. Square works best for this design, and let's get painting. Do it. So I'm going to start by wetting the paper so I don't get the paint too dark. And quite lightly, it's just really so that the paint spreads without getting too dark. And I'm going to use my Azo Yellow, which is just a bright yellow. You can use cadmium yellow, transparent yellow, lemon yellow if you wanted, just nice bright yellow. And I want to put that, I've got my dragonfly going slightly diagonally over to the left. So I want my grass to be slightly diagonal over to the right, so I don't have everything going in the same direction. I'm going to start with quite a lot of yellow because I don't want it to get too dark, but I can have more dark in the corners. And I'm going to mix a little, I have sap green, which I'm going to mix into that yellow, but you can use hooker's green, permanent green, just a sort of a nice bright green. And on each side of that yellow, and coming up a little bit from the bottom and down a little bit from the top, I'm going to put that sap green that I've mixed. I bring my palette. I had some yellow right here, and I just mixed some sap green in with that. And I'm going to take some ultramarine blue. You could use cobalt blue or ultramarine blue. And this is going to be for darkening up the corners. Now, I don't have to worry about the dragonfly in the corners. It's not there. And a little bit from the bottom and the top where there's no dragonfly. Now, when I get my cling film, it's just a little bit bigger than my paper, and I'm just going to lay it over, and it's good if it's wrinkled, but I want to pull the wrinkles in that kind of either vertical or diagonal direction by kind of manipulating the cling film, because I want it to sort of look like grass or greenery. And just kind of push it, pull it, manipulate it, and then just pat it down. And you can keep, if it's not quite wrinkled enough, you can wrinkle it a little bit more. And then it has to be left for a few minutes. So I'm going to let you do yours now that you've watched. And I'm going to prepare another one just so I've got one to go back and forth on. I'm going to put this to one side for a minute. What we're doing is waiting for the paint to dry a little bit. It shouldn't take too long before it's soaked in and starting to dry a little bit. And when we do remove the film, we're probably going to have to do a little bit of hair dryer before we can do anything on top. Otherwise, you're not going to get nice crisp lines on your dragonfly. So what I'm sort of looking at doing is, even though the wings are very, very translucent, sometimes they will reflect light, like in this photograph here. So that's sort of what we're going to try and do. We're going to use some phthalo blue or turquoise blue or something like that, and some violet, because we have a lot of yellow in the background, and try and make the wings look sort of translucent. We're going to have to use more color than you see in the photo. I've got one more photo here, and this one, of course, is very similar. It's got the very sort of blurred background and then the color and the shimmer. I have a lot of shimmery paints that I can use, and I want to give you some suggestions while we're waiting for this to dry if you don't have shimmery paints. The cheapest way, I'll go through all my tools here. The cheapest way is to get a pen that is shiny or glittery. I've got several different examples here. I'm going to grab a piece of black paper. I'll grab black paper so you can see the different shimmers. The very cheapest one is the Jelly Roll Shimmer Pen. It has a little star on it here, and that just gives you a lovely sort of translucent shimmer to anything. Let's zoom in. And if you just want a little bit of shimmer on your wings, I think these pens are around $2.80 or something like that from iron oxide or Michaels. I prefer to go to iron oxide. So that's your cheapest version. Jelly Roll do lots of different versions of sparkly pens. This one's a little bit more silver, just a tiny bit more silver. So that will give you, if you wanted sort of lovely, if this is your Dragonfly wing and you wanted to have some lovely shimmery effects. And you don't need to have one of those today. If this is something you would like on your finished painting, you can pick one up after your painting's dry and do that. Also, Jelly Roll make, white pens, colored pens. So if you wanted to have some white accents on your painting, you could use that. This one more expensive. These are about $14, $15. This is called Winco Stella, and it's even more translucent. And this comes as a brush pen, and you can brush on beautiful, beautiful, sparkly accents. Great for Christmas cards. So those are the cheapest options. Now Michaels sells, I don't like Michaels very much, but iron oxide sells these too, I think. They sell these very inexpensive iridescent paints. And they're not bad really for how cheap they are. You've got a range of colors here. So if you wanted to put, say, a blue on, they take a bit of working. Like you have to really sort of work with some water to get the paint off of them. But if you work it round and round a bit and then paint with them, again, they are really for, I think they're about $12 for a pan of these. They're really quite lovely. And you've got all the colors. You've got silver and light gold and gold and bronzy gold and different colors. So this is silver. So again, you have a range of kind of lovely iridescent paints for not much money. Then you can go really expensive. These are fine tech paints, probably one of the best that there are. And I'm pretty sure a box like this will cost you $50 or $60, but they are the best in watercolor metallics and iridescence. So this is their silvery white, and you can see the difference of how it's much more opaque, much more fine, and the gold is absolutely stunning. Again, they need a little bit of work to get them off of but they shimmer so beautifully. There's all of those. This is what I spend my money on. This is all I spend my money on. These are fine tech paints as well, but they are stronger colors. So this is a beautiful sort of Dragonfly peacock blue. And you hardly need any paint to make a gorgeous effect as those. But I'm not suggesting you get something this expensive. Like I said, for $2 or $3, you can get a nice shimmery pen that works. These are fine tech color changing ones. They have like 2 or 3 colors in them, which are beautiful. Most of these have to be used on black paper, but they do show up over your watercolor paints. And that's the shimmery blue. And last of all, you can buy pearly additives. This is a powdered pearly additive called Pearlex. Comes in all colors. I just have some silver here. And you just mix that with your paint to make it pearly. Also, most of the paint manufacturers do a bottle of iridescent liquid that you can mix with your watercolor paints to make them pearly. So if you want to have fun, pearly looks to your painting, there's a lot of options and they don't all have to be expensive. I would say if you want to make your dragonfly look glittery and beautiful and you want to do something for Christmas cards, one of these $2 or $3 jelly roll pens are your answer. They last a long time and you can use them for all sorts of things. So that's hopefully given my paint a little bit of time to dry. Let's check my first one. Just lift it off. Now it's not completely dry. And if this was not a class, I'd probably give it an hour or so to dry, but we sort of want to move on today. But I've still got that texture for the background, and I'll use my hairdryer in just a moment. And let's try this one. I'm going to work on a couple today, just because people don't have to pick just one of the illustrations. They can pick more than one. So we've got that one. Now I'm going to pause the recording while I use my hairdryer to just dry them off. If yours are, give yours a few more seconds. As long as the paint has had time to sort of soak in and make the design, you're good to go then with the hairdryer. Try and get this so you can see. Zoom in a little bit. As long as it's dry enough to work on, that's good. And I think you're going to find this fairly easy because it's you know, just very direct painting. There's not much. This is the most wet in wet really that we're going to do. And hopefully yours has made quite a pretty background for you. And I find the easiest place to start is to start sort of with the eyes and then work down the dragonfly. So let's look at the reference photo. I've got a couple of good reference photos of this type of dragonfly here. This one here shows more sort of green and blue in the face, and this one shows a more solid blue. And I think we'll go with the more solid blue look. It's just a bit easier to paint. And the only thing you really need to think about is keeping some of the blue area lighter. And remember, with the egg and with the avocado, you can wet that just a little bit to try and keep it a little bit lighter than the rest of it. So this blue is mostly an ultramarine blue. And if you want to make the ultramarine blue a little bit brighter for some of these areas, you can use a phthalo blue with it, which makes it a little bit brighter for those colors. So let's now you need small brushes as well for this. I have my number 2, so number 1 or number 2 brush in your hand. And the first thing I want to do is the light area, just, oops, too much. Get my cleaner, it's too much wet on my brush. And I just want to just wet the top of that head there, so it's not going to be so bright. And I'm going to get my ultramarine blue. I have a lot of blues in my palette already, and this one has some cerulean in it, but it's okay because I want a mix of ultramarine with a cooler blue. So I'm going to just put it there and let it mix with that cerulean that was already in my palette. You can use, if you want a slightly brighter blue, you can use, I'm going to use a little bit of phthalo to brighten that up a little bit. Let's make it a little bit stronger. And then I have to sort of think about my highlights on here. I can put my highlights in afterwards with a white pen or with some white Doc PH Martins if I lose them. So I'm not going to be too worried. And the other thing is, if you have if you have a lot of green under there, it's going to make your blue more green anyway. I'm just painting on very carefully with the tip of my brush. I've got my photo in front of me. I'm painting that little blue head on the dragonfly. And what makes this easier is it's very direct painting, a lot of it. If I want a little bit more shadow of the ultramarine on there, I'm going to wait till that's dry and just add that afterwards if I want to get it a little bit darker. And what I want to look at is all the other areas on the dragonfly that are blue on the body. And it's easier to put all those light areas in first before you put in the browns or the blacks if you're doing this one. I did also prepare this one because I rather loved the close-up, how you get a really, really good close-up and a variety of blues in this face of the dragonfly. And while I have the blue here, I just want to work on that one quickly because I think it's such a fascinating looking creature. When you really look at how the wings are structured and how strong they are, where they connect to the body, it's quite amazing. Now I have a rather pretty color called turquoise, and I'm going to try that for this. It's got a little bubble just here. I don't know if it's part of its eyes or a sensory system. I don't know quite what all the parts are. And then it has this lovely, really turquoisey blue area here. This is a Van Gogh color. They're a student paint, not very expensive, but the turquoise is really pretty. And I bought a tube because I don't have a true turquoise. And of course, blue being a primary color, it's very difficult to actually mix anything that's a blue if it's not within the range of phthalo or ultramarine. If you don't have turquoise, I would suggest cerulean or phthalo blue will work for that cool blue. And what I'm doing right now is I'm wetting my brush and I'm just sucking up a little of that paint to lighten it in spots. These ones here are much, much lighter. I will use cerulean on those, gentler color. Just on the side. And of course, most of that area is a sort of a white color. And I think cobalt for the sides of the eyes. The eyes must be incredibly complex on these insects. In fact, their whole body system, when you look up close, they look like such delicate creatures, and they're incredibly strong and complex. A little bit of cobalt on the side. And I'm going to add some Prussian to the cobalt for the top of the head. And I'll come back with another layer. No, I want a bit more ultramarine. The Prussian's a bit too cool. I'm adding ultramarine to that blue. Now there's quite a lot of detail on those as well that will need to go on in a second layer. But that's the first layer for the head of that dragonfly. Just put that to one side. Bring this one back. And then I want to put all the blues that go down the body. I think I'm just going to use phthalo blue for that. Let's get just pure, just getting my pure Phthalo Blue. And remembering that I have a bit of yellow and green behind the paint, so it will make it look a little bit different. There's two sort of little areas just here that are blue. Too many pictures going on here. I lost my other one. Oh, there it is. I'm looking at this picture right now just for the colors. Little dot here in the middle of the wings, those stripy bits. I find it so hard to keep track of all the parts. And then this other one here, the parts that are blue on this photo look really lime green on this one. So it really doesn't matter what you choose, because the light reflecting on them is obviously going to make them look different. And put these parts in. And it also doesn't matter if you paint parts blue that are not blue, because you're going to come along with your brown and your dark black color and go over them. So it will go right over the blue. We'll start down here because I tend to get lost right in the middle. I can't remember where the bits of color go. Well, let's go down to the bottom. And of course, this is being very detailed. You can also paint dragonflies as just a wash of color, a blur of color that's much less detailed. It's totally up to you. And there's color on the side. And of course, because the wings are translucent, we can see through them to the color underneath. It's a little bit less detailed and more blurred with the wings, but we can still see them underneath. Also, all of the legs and antenna can be a bit confusing. It kind of looks like it has 8 legs if you look at it quickly, but 2 of these here and here are antenna, and then this leg is from the other side of the body here. And when I looked at the legs closely, they had an awful lot of those very spiky hairs on them, obviously so that they can cling on to things with them. Let's get this one here. If we look at this one, really, really spiky parts on the legs, and they're what I guess claws. They almost have a claw on the end here for hanging on to things, and that's probably very spiky too. Interesting. Right, so I've got my blue on the body, and the nice thing is if we're working with fairly dry paint on dry, it doesn't take long for that paint to dry. I have a couple of photos of this one here. So there's this photo where you barely see the structure of the wings, and then there's this one where the light is catching the structure of the wings and it shows up kind of white or blue. So we've got some blue. Let's at least put some blue on, because we can go over it with pen or with darker color later if we want to, but let's at least, with the very point of the brush, add some of that wing structure, especially around the outside of the wing. And one of the things I tend to do if I'm painting something that's linear like this is skip. And it makes it much easier to paint too. So a few lines, little lines, and then skip a space. It makes it more delicate, makes it easier to paint, and it's just more interesting. Also in the photo here, you can see little parts of reflected blue in the wing structure here. So we can put those little areas on too. The structure in between is almost like little rectangles. So we can put those sort of little rectangle shapes in. And it helps to show the structure of the wing without showing actual lines, which we can put in with pen or with brush later. The other color we're going to use that isn't so much in the photographs is a lilac color. And the reason is we have a lot of yellow in our background, and lilac is going to be a lovely complementary to the yellow that we have. And there's nothing to say that if somebody else photographed a dragonfly, they wouldn't have lilac reflections when they photographed it. So we're going to take a little bit of artistic license and just imagine that it's there. So again, I'm using just the tip of my brush to put in a few blue reflections on the wings. And same with the other side. You can see them much stronger where the wings attach to the body, and because it is fairly strong where they attach. The second row of veins too seems to be a fairly strong sort of ribbing, and they show up more. And I'm looking for, there's a few little reflected blues here, here, and here. Now already my body is pretty dry, and probably dry enough to go in with the browns, to put in the brown areas on the body. I used just looking to see what I used for the brown. Sepia. I used sepia. So it doesn't really matter what brown you use. You can make a dark brown. Let me just zoom out a little bit. So sepia, I get is just a good dark brown. I'll put it here over the green. Doesn't matter if there's green mixed in with it. I never bother too much about what's on my palette. Just overwhelm it with the new color. So that's just sepia by itself. I can mix ultramarine blue with burnt sienna to get a very similar color to sepia. And not too different. More blue to darken it up. I can mix a bit of ultramarine blue with sepia to darken it up a little bit. And you may have a different brown. You may have a burnt umber. You may have Van Dyke brown. You may just have something that says dark brown. All of them are fine to use. And a mixture of all of them is fine. I'm just going to get a little bit of burnt sienna by itself, just to put here. So now I have a real variety of browns here that I can use. And if I use Phthalo Blue with that, it darkens it up even more. One of the great things to use is a variety. And let's zoom in again to the body. And get my brown on my little thin brush. And I want to start filling in the darker areas. Now you need, when you're going dark, this is a time for much less water in your paint and more pigment. Otherwise, you're not going to get it nice and dark. So you're not diluting it out so much. You're adding a lot more pigment. And little brush that's not very wet. Don't have your brush too wet. But your paint still needs to flow nicely off of your brush. And we got a little sort of triangle there, and then we have some structure on the body here. That's dark brown. And I'm going to go to a slightly lighter brown by just adding a bit of water to that burnt sienna mix. This is just an area behind these two little bits here. Too much water. I'm using my little sponge here just to control my water. Back and forth into my paint, my sponge, my water, to just get that area just a little bit lighter behind those two little wings there. And we don't have to be too precise because the eye is just going to see a whole bunch of pattern on there that's very difficult to discern if you're just standing back and looking. So when I'm just dotting in those, my little tiny brush, just a point, just dotting in some of those darks under the wings and on top of the body. We're not doing this. I mean, this one is not a real close up. The other one that I have is very close up, so you can be a bit more precise. I want to add a little bit more burnt sienna and just warm up the brown mix a little bit and come down the tail. The key is to just have, I was looking at my photograph again. Is to have that blue-brown pattern. And where the back catches the light is much warmer brown. So I'm going in just into my burnt sienna. So it's a little bit warmer coming down here. If you were doing a close-up of this pattern down the body of the dragonfly, it's incredibly beautiful. It does have white and very light brown, and the little patterns coming down the center of the back almost look like little dragonflies coming down there. And if you want to get that precise, you can, but I think in this size it's pretty impossible. You have to just kind of do an indicator of the design. And if you want to indicate some of those white lines, just leave a space, don't paint there. But remember the edge of the body, I'm bringing my paintbrush down the edge of the body. We don't want it too disconnected. So I'm just sort of connecting the edges. Looking at I'm just doing a general idea of the design. It's also down the center. There is a sort of a line in the design that sort of connects the center. Mine's will be a little bit ropey. And if you need some lighter areas, I suggest doing that later with a white pen or white ink or something. At the end of the body, there are 3 sort of little pincer things on the tail. One short one in the middle, and then 2 longer ones. And some of them had a little dot in the middle. Also I haven't put any of the dark on the head yet. The head has some very dark detail on it too. Sort of a bulge in the body there. Let's get that bulge in there. Now you're seeing mine very close up, but once you pull back a little bit from yours or mine, the design all kind of melds together and just forms the shape of the dragonfly. That's why we don't, in something this small, we don't need to be super precise. Of course, you can be if you love being precise. And if you're doing a much bigger one, you can definitely look at your photo and be much, much more precise. And I'm sticking with this sort of blue and brown photo, but there was also another photo that was more sort of lime green and blue and more a gray black sort of color. So it depends on the light shining on the dragonfly, the photographer, all those kinds of things. Now, like I said, I took a little bit of artistic liberty with the wings, and this is where we're going to do some wet in wet. I'll just wait for you to catch up. But we will be putting in more color than you can see in the photograph, just so that our wings show up a little bit more. And if you want, I put a couple of very loose dragonflies in the background. I just felt it needed a little bit more to the composition, but you don't have to put them in there. That's totally up to you. Now, if your body is fairly dry and your wing structure is fairly dry, you know, mine's pretty dry, you can work on the wet in wet colors on the wings. And I have used, now I have one called Quinacridone Gold, which I don't use very often, but I thought I would use it on the wings where they're near the body on this one. You don't have to. If you want that kind of a look, but you don't have Quinacridone Gold, you could use a raw sienna, or you could put a little bit of pink with a little bit of rose with the raw sienna to warm it up, or you can just leave it translucent. What I have done is I have used a turquoisey blue and a violet. Now, if you don't have a turquoisey blue, you can use Cerulean, which is a fairly turquoisey blue. I'm just cleaning a space here so I can actually get some clean cerulean. And if you're using a violet for this dragonfly, that's not cerulean blue. I'm thinking 2 steps ahead. That was cobalt. This is cerulean. I was thinking onto the violet already. Yes, if you use dioxazine violet, it's going to be a little bit too strong. Ultramarine violet would be okay. This is ultramarine violet. It's much softer than dioxazine violet. Or if you prefer, you can make a violet, which is why I was going into the cobalt. You can make a violet with cobalt blue and rose, permanent rose, or quinacridone rose, or just rose. Or there's one called rose d'or as well, which they're all pretty rose colors that will make you a very pretty violet. So I'm actually adding a little bit more rose to make it more violet-y so that it goes with the cerulean a little better when it's more of a rosy violet. I have those colors ready. And I don't want them to be too strong on the wings. So I'm going to put I'm just going to work on one wing at a time. I'm going to get a bigger brush. I have my number 8 brush so that I can get this on a little faster. And I'm going to bring my number 8 brush and some of that cerulean onto the wing. And now I've washed my brush, wetting it a little bit. And I'm just using some water to spread that out. Just water on my brush to spread it out so that I don't have it too strong. I want it to be very translucent. And I'm going to take a little bit of that violet that I mixed. And on the underside of that wing, I'm going to bring the violet in, and it looks quite strong. So again, I'm going to wash my brush, just use water on my brush to spread that violet throughout the wing. Just gently spreading it with water because we don't want it too strong. Now, if you did want gold near the body and the gold goes nicely with the blue, you could use, if you don't, I'm going to just show you my quinacridone, which is a rather beautiful color. I've just got to get some here, and it's very strong. So what I want to do first is put water on so that it's not going to be too strong. Take a little bit of that quinacridone and just drop it into that water that I put on there. Now, you could use raw sienna. You could use a little bit of gamboge with a little bit of raw sienna. You could use raw sienna with a tiny bit of rose in it. Any sort of color that just enhances that kind of gold color near the body. I'll do all of those suggestions. So for this one, I'm going to put the water on the wing. And this time I'll get raw sienna with a little bit of rose. And I'll put that near them. I think I need in that, I think that's maybe a little bit dark. I think I'm going to add to that a little bit of my Azo Yellow. I'm just testing out those suggestions here. That's a little bit better. So I had the raw sienna, a little bit of rose, and a little bit of the Azo Yellow added to a wet wing here. And then the blue and a little bit of the violet. And you have to be very delicate because remember the wings are delicate and you want to keep them. I'm just putting a wet brush into that. And you want to keep the colors very transparent and delicate. And we will be going over this with a little bit of detail. So now I'm going to try a different mix on this one. Again, I'm just going to wet the wing a little bit. And I'm going to get gamboge. Gamboge is a very orangey yellow. Gamboge with a little bit of raw sienna. Raw sienna is pretty strong, so I have to be careful what I'm doing here. And I'm going to try that one. That's quite a nice, like goldy color. So that was gamboge, a little bit of raw sienna. And you can make a gamboge color by using a cadmium yellow with a cadmium red to make a very, very slightly orangey red orangey yellow. I'm sorry, my mind has gone. Sort of orangey yellow. Not so much orange, but a yellow that has a tinge of orange to it. That's what gamboge is. Very, very warm yellow. I'm putting in my cerulean blue and the violet. The violet, you have to be very, very careful because you just want to touch just to see the edges on some of those wings. And if it blends too much, you can use your thirsty brush. Remember, wash, dry your brush. Just use the tip of your thirsty brush to like blend any out that gets a bit too much away from you. I quite like that last color I mixed with the gamboge and the raw sienna. And I'm going to go back to my Quinacridone Gold for the top wing. And just wet that top wing. I don't want these colors to be too strong. That's why I want to wet the wing and take this is the Quinacridone Gold. It's a beautiful, strong color. And the cobalt blue, no, not cobalt, cerulean blue on the tip. And a little bit of the violet. You want to get as much color as you can in sort of the wing tips and edges of the wings so that they show up. And then you can blend them in with a little bit of water. Now, if you don't get enough color on in the first layer, that's okay, because you can come on with a second layer and say these top wings, if you wanted to have a bit more color when this layer is dry, you could put a bit more color in on the second layer and darken it up a little bit so that you get one layer over the other layer. Anyway, I'm going to put on this one, I'm going to do it like the photograph and have the back wings sort of more on the top. But I do want to put a little bit of, I'm going to mix my cerulean with my lilac. And I am just going to add a little bit of shadow, smaller brush. The shadow kind of under the wings, just very, very lightly. And along the wing edge. Now, when you're doing the little details like the legs and the antenna, you might feel much more comfortable using a black pen if you find that easier. I will use a little paintbrush for now and mix up a nice dark color. I use anything that's on the palette really to get a dark color. I've got some dark brown here mixed with the ultramarine and the burnt sienna. I'm going to add a bit of Payne's gray to that and a bit more ultramarine to that. But you could also use some violet to that. Anything that's a sort of a dark color like ultramarine or Payne's gray or sepia or violet, if you mix them all together with very little water, you're going to get something pretty close to black. I don't know if I put a black mix on the notes. I'm just looking. I don't think I did. I don't know why. But I think I said when the blues dry, use sepia. I think I maybe missed out doing the black details, so I maybe should modify my notes a little bit. But I have that really dark color that I just mixed on top of the brown there. Payne's gray is always a good one for getting a lovely dark color without having to go to a dead sort of a black. And I have my number 2 brush. You could use a number 1 or a 0. And I want to put in those legs. Now the photograph has some blue highlights on the legs, but I just think our pictures are too small for that. But if you were doing a bigger one, certainly you could put in those blue highlights on the legs that look very pretty. Using just the point of my brush. Now you can actually see on my photograph I have here, you can see the little hairs on the legs, but I think I'll do that with a very fine pen. I might make a big mess with my paintbrush. And there are also some details on the head. The head has a sort of a very dark black blob on the back. And let's zoom in a bit. You can actually see what I'm doing here. It has some shape around the head and down the center of the, I guess these are the eyes actually. You can use your very small brush. There are some dots on the eyes that could, I guess they are shadows, and I don't know. They're big compound eyes, so it's hard to know. Now I have a very fine pen here. And I'm just going to use that fine pen to put in the antenna. This one's a 01. You can also get a 005 or a 02. They'll all be pretty fine. And I think I'm going to use that very fine pen just to put in a few of those little hairs on the legs. It's so interesting. They seem to go downwards in a sort of a chevron pattern, fairly evenly down the legs. Now, at this point, you have a choice. You can use a very fine pen to put in details on the wings if you want to, or you can use a very, very fine paintbrush. Like I have a 2/0 rather, liner brush. And I'm going to start with that and my dark paint and see how I do with that before I give in and go to a pen, because I just feel like I can get a more delicate touch with a paintbrush. And I just enjoy using a paintbrush more. But I do kind of want to put in a little bit of the structure of the wing. And I keep the photograph in front of me so that I have a reference. There are some very main lines to the structure that seem to be stronger lines than the other ones on the wings. And those are the ones I put in first. There seems to be one that curves off and down like this. And of course, there's you can put a little, and again, break up your line. If you break up your line, it looks more natural if you don't have a continuous line. In between those lines on the wing, There are some other ones, there's some heavier ones, and then there's some much lighter ones. So you don't have to put them all in, but sometimes if you just put a little bit of an indication of those lines, it's enough to show some kind of pattern. Best thing is to start small and work your way up and take stock every now and again and see how it's looking from a distance. And again, don't do a continuous line, disconnect. It's actually a very strong structure as it attaches to the body. So I'm putting in a little bit more black there, or dark color. And if you have the reference photo close by, you will see that every so often there's a stronger connector between those layers of sort of mesh on the wing. I guess that's what they are. They're kind of a mesh that gives it strength. And you definitely don't have to put it all in. You just need to give slight indicators here and there. So here and there, I'm doing a stronger line, a few of those vertical lines going down. They form a kind of like a honeycomb pattern in the wing, and it's not regular. Some of the spaces are big and some of the spaces are much smaller. I don't want to do anything too regular. So sometimes rather than just lines, I can do those sort of honeycomb shapes. This is where you go slow. Slow down and take your time and see how much is needed. Take a step back a little bit, lift your head up and look at it from a bit more of a distance. You're seeing mine really close up, but you have to, when you're painting, you have to look back and look at stuff from a distance so that you're not so involved with close up what you're doing. I'm going over to this side. And sometimes in a watercolor painting, because it's so hard to get the whites in there or the light colors, sometimes you have to just do the reverse of what is in the photo. If it's a light blue line or a light white area, you have to do the reverse and put something dark there so it shows up. This, because this line on the top of the photograph is a very, very light blue, but I have to put something a bit more positive in there to be seen because of our background, because of the medium we're painting in. And because we saw every photograph is going to show something a little bit different. And I'm actually going much faster right now than I would, just because I'm aware that of the time that we don't have all day. And so I'm having to speed it up a little bit. You don't have to go that fast. After I'm gone and you've had lunch, you can come back and do a little bit more detail. You don't have to rush. I can get lost in the detail. I can spend a lot of time doing this kind of thing. And it depends on how accurate you want your painting to be. I would suggest if you want a really accurate botanical painting of a dragonfly, go a bit bigger than we've gone today. Bigger than life, larger than life, because it's very hard to paint something as small as a dragonfly size. And give yourself more space to put in the details. And then really, really examine your reference photo. Find one that you love and really examine it as you go so that you're doing it carefully, following the picture. You don't have to be fast. You don't have to be speedy. You can take your time. And if you find it much too hard to use a little paintbrush like this, then get yourself a fine pen. 005 is very, very fine. And I have one somewhere. It's gone walkabouts for a minute. Oh, here it is. I found it. So on this bit of paper, I'll show you this is the 005 pen. It's a pretty fine line. And I was using my 01, which is a little bit thicker. And let's look at 02. 02 is a little bit thicker again. So many different thicknesses of pens. I should have a 03 somewhere. There it is. 03. And I've got a 05. For some reason, I've never ever seen a 04. And then the next one up, they usually put in the packs a 08. You can get these in a pack sometimes. And then I have one that is just one, and really thick. So you can get, these are all waterproof pens. So you can get a lot of thicknesses, and the 005, I think, is the thinnest you can get in these waterproof pens. So if you do want to do something with very fine lines, find yourself one of those. Or I really love using a paintbrush. 2/0 suits me just fine. Let's work on those if you wanted to. If you feel like you want those little ones flying in the background that are just little ones that are much less defined than this. They're quick, very quick to do. And I like to just kind of put their shape in with pencil first. Now let's have a little one flying up here. Sometimes they have a kind of a curve to their tail as they're flying, little body, head, and then the wings. And let's have one sort of diving down here. Body, wings. And then these have to be quick and loose, nice and quick and loose. Good to start with the lightest part, which is the wings. I'm just looking for a brush that's a good size. 4 is a pretty good size. Now I want some of my lilac. I've got to mix a little bit more lilac here. A bit more blue. I want to put the wings in pretty quickly. Just a sort of a splash of color. With my number 4 brush. A little bit of cerulean, or you can use turquoise. I just want to blend that wet with the violet. And we got one down here. A little bit more turquoise. Nice thing about the turquoise is it's a very transparent color. So down here we'll have the wings. And again, a little bit of wet with the with the violet. Really, really loose. That one's a bit messy, but you know what? It's a bit too messy. It's a bit too messy. Let's try them again. A little bit of the violet. Sometimes messy is okay, but sometimes you want it not too messy. And my very thin liner brush again, and I'm going into that dark brown that I mixed for the body. My liner brush, and just really, really delicately put in the tail. And again, not in one continuous line, do a little bit more. And the body, I don't even mind if that body goes into the wings there and the head, just real quick. That kind of looks nice if the body actually goes into the wet wings. And this one, the body is kind of quite big and strong. And then we have the tail coming out. And I'm not too happy with the wings still, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water. A little bit of water to the wings. I want them really loose, but I kind of fussing a bit with them, aren't they? There we go. Let's zoom out a bit so they look less imposing. If they seem to be getting a bit too dark, you can always like blot a little bit with a Kleenex. You don't want them fighting for competition with your main dragonfly. Now I have a little bit of P.H. Martin's white, which I find so much easier to use than any masking fluid or anything like that after the fact. And there's a couple of little white spots that I want to retrieve. My reference photo. There's on the back of the eyes, there's a little bit of white here and here. And, you know, we had that yellowy background here when I'm going to put a bit of white in there. There's a little bit on the tail that was way too hard to preserve. I'm going to put in. We were just, you know, there were a few little tiny details of white design on the body that it's impossible to leave with something this small. And on the wings, there were a few places where it reflected light, and I'd like to put a little bit of that in, either with, now you've got lots of choices. You have the pastel pencils, which I showed you. You can use a white one of those and a blue one of those if you like. I will show you a little bit with the sparkly pen and sparkly paints. They're all, you don't want to overdo it, you don't want all of them, but they are all helpful to get back some of that iridescence that's on the wings, that reflection of light. And it's really hard to mask something like that up because it has to be kind of like this kind of random little spots and dots. Again, don't do too much. Another thing that I did on my original, you may not even notice, I did some splattering. Move some of my stuff out the way so it's splatter indiscriminately. Let's get some of the color that I'm using. So some violet, a little bit of violet, and just a tap of splatter, a little bit of blue, just a tap. Sometimes it just helps to tie the painting together, make it look a little bit more like light, kind of, you know how light kind of reflects and shines and dapples a photo or a scene. There, and let's find my, first of all, let's zoom in again. And I'll get my pen. Just looking a little bit. There we go. So I can put a lot of the sparkle on the wing just with my sparkle pen. Zoom in a little bit more. Just with sort of dots here and there. And that will give it a lovely sort of sparkle and iridescent shine, if that's sort of what you're looking for. That's what you want. You don't have to do that. You could just do a little bit of white or white pen or charcoal pen. A little bit of that on. And let's look at our the fine tip paints are lovely. Look at a little bit of the silvery white. A little bit of that. And I can also add some iridescence with that if I wanted to have that sort of like shiny look where the wings are reflecting. And of course, if I wanted more color, there's also, I have lots of color in the expensive ones, but there's also these cheap ones. And I think this blue is a lovely sort of dragonfly blue color. And let's see how that works on the wing. Dab a little bit, got water everywhere. And like I said, these are just, I think, the cheapest ones Michael had for iridescent paints, and not an expensive brand. And that sort of dragonfly blue is very pretty. Use that too, even on the body if I wanted a little bit of shine. Oh, sorry, I'm off camera there with my, I'm just putting a little bit of that sparkly blue on the wingtips. But you don't have to go out and buy all these paints. They're just suggestions. I don't use them very often. I use them more on black than on something like this. And you can really get by with a $3 pen. The thing is, if you go to Michael's for these pens, you usually have to buy a whole set. Although I think maybe they do sell them individually now. Iron Oxide sells them individually, and she has, I think, every color. The gold one is really lovely. Like the gold pen really does a gorgeous gold. So nice for Christmas cards. Just a thought. And you definitely don't have to have them. Now let's zoom out a little bit. Oh, that's that one. I'm really enjoying this design too, but that one will take me 2 or 3 more hours to finish. But I will finish this up because I like the close-up look of this one and the detail. I really like all the detail, the different blues in the body. So I will go on and I will finish this one. But a painting this size 6x6 in this detail really should take you 3 or 4 hours. It's not a quick paint, that's for sure. And I know this one today was, again, like I said, I've gone really fast. You can certainly take your time and take more care and go a little slower than I've gone. And we are not even like at our time, so I could have gone a little bit slower. Well, I hope your dragonfly turned out okay. There's lots of ways to enhance it with different sparkly pens and paint when you're finished, if you want to or not. So see you next week. Next week we're going to paint cats, black cats and white cats, and feel free to use a picture of your cat. So thanks for joining me. Bye for now.